Okay, Pamela Falk.
Good morning.
Nice to have you with us. Big news at the UN yesterday. You covered that like a glove.
Yeah, so many things going on.
I know. Bob Dole came into the Senate yesterday.
Yes, and as you mentioned, he's pretty frail, and he really cared about this. This was a bill that the GIs are for. There are a lot of veterans groups that hope to get this passed, and it mimics in many ways the Americans for Disabilities Act. And that was passed, of course, one of the crowning achievements and gold standard passed by George H.W. Bush. This was a convention that would have put it in international terms, and the U.S. Was up for signing it, and was negotiated by George W. Bush, signed by President Obama, Obama's UN ambassador, a little controversial UN ambassador, Susan Rice, and now it was up for Senate ratification, but it failed with 38 Republicans casting no votes, and it fell 5 short of the 2/3 majority needed to ratify. So it'll come back, but it's disappointing to many at the UN and at the U.S. And
what was the Republicans that voted against it, even though former Republican presidential candidate Bob Dole went into the chamber, wheelchair, looking frail. He's in his mid-90s. What was the main objections of the Republicans that voted this down?
Well, there were several Republicans that really put pressure against it. One from Kansas, Republicans Jerry Moran and Pat Roberts. But the real spokesperson against it was Rick Santorum. Senator Santorum does have a disabled child and felt that this would put the UN over the U.S. in terms of some of the things it says, best interest of the child and some technical points on it. But the White House really made the point that ratification requires no changes to U.S. law, and since the U.S. ADA is just so comprehensive, it really wouldn't change at all relative to this, but allow veterans to travel and sort of bring up other countries' standards, ramps in airports and bathrooms that would be accessible. So it would allow so many disabled veterans from Iraq, Afghanistan, earlier wars, and allow them to travel and sort of level the playing field internationally. So I think you'll see it come back, but it was a great disappointment to Senator Kerry, a lot of other, Senator Dole, of course, who really thought this was sort of a shoo-in.
Now, Pamela, as you described already, this was based on the Americans with Disabilities Act, and if I'm not mistaken, if we had passed this treaty, it wouldn't really do anything to force any foreign government to change their laws or to spend resources on the disabled. It just would have set a standard. Is that correct? That's
correct. There's no enforceability in this. It just suggests standards by which countries do it. And also the U.S. Constitution wouldn't allow this to have any impact on U.S. law. And so that's happened a lot of times with treaties. They've tried to put something into effect in U.S. law. It comes up to the Supreme Court. They say, no, it has the same weight, but not if it's not put into the convention or treaty as such.
Now, are we thinking that the Obama administration was essentially supporting this as a tool to perhaps export to human rights and human dignity around the world?
Yes, that's precisely what it was doing. Senator Rick Santorum said, look, if I thought that were true, I would have supported it, and that the United States should do more to promote human rights in other countries and enforce human rights standards in other countries. But he didn't feel this would do that. But it certainly that's what it is intended to do, is to bring other countries into line, understanding, what it was like before the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed. And the numbers are unbelievable. There are 57 million Americans with disabilities and 650 million people around the world. That's 10% of the world's population. So there's a real need to have small things, a ramp, a elevator. I work in a building where FDR recovered from polio, and just looking at the elevator every day, in addition to the UN has all of those disability requirements because it's in the United States.
I actually have to confess that I am a disabled American from a car accident 8 years ago. And the first 8 months having to stay in the wheelchair, I became acutely aware of the types of buildings you can and cannot get into, simply getting down off the curb to cross the street sometimes if there's not the indentation like that. So I'm kind of on Bob Dole's side on this one.
Understandably. I mean, I've seen disabled veterans come into an airport in other countries, and then all of a sudden there's just stairs. I mean, flights and flights of stairs. No access elevators, nothing. So this was really going to put the burden on other countries. And by the way, 155 countries have already signed and ratified, and it's been signed it and ratified by 126, and that's France and Britain and Germany, Russia, China.
Pamela,
so it's long overdue for the United States.
Pamela, are we the odd man out on this, like we were with the Kyoto Treaty?
Yes. But, I mean, Kyoto Treaty is even more complicated. This one just seems to be a no-brainer.
Yeah.
I mean, Kyoto got involved with U.S. industries and everything. This one only helps.
Okay, for those just joining us on the John Frederick Show, we're talking with Pamela Falk. She is the Chief United Nations Correspondent for CBS, and we're talking about the vote yesterday where in the United States Senate trying to ratify the UN Disabilities Act, that went down by 5, chiefly as a result of 38 Republicans voting no. Rick Santorum, former Pennsylvania senator, former Republican presidential candidate, one of the key influencers in there, lobbying senators to vote against it. On the other side was Bob Dole. He came back trying to get senators to ratify this treaty, which has been ratified by 126 other nations around the globe. Common Sense News Time 724. Pamela, I want to switch topics for a second. Talk about the Palestinians. Now, they've asked the UN Security Council to stop or get in the way of 2 massive Israeli settlements near Jerusalem.
Right.
Is that going anywhere?
Well, it's the General Assembly that passed it, and again, it's not. There's no enforcement there. But neither was the vote that basically changed the status to observer state. But it sends a message, and that is a message sent by the European community as well, that settlements don't seem to be helpful, and that's what the White House said as well, a helpful reaction to this vote. I mean, the vote didn't really do anything much except for give a little dignity to the Palestinians and maybe get them to the bargaining table without all these requirements that they had. And there's an election in Israel is the bottom line, and I think there's a lot of public support for the settlements. On the other hand, it really is sort of the death knell of the peace process. So there's a lot of pressure on Israel to back down off of it, and you may very well see that in February when the election is over.
We're with Dr. Pamela Falk of CBS here on the John Frederick Show. Dr. Falk, we were commenting earlier that we're stunned by the silence of the Obama administration in regards to Egyptian President Morsi's attempt to usurp the Constitution and garner what appears to the naked eye, the layman, as sweeping dictatorial authority, almost fascist-like. Meantime, nothing out of the State Department, nothing from the Obama administration per se. It's almost like the silence is deafening. What's up?
Well, you're right, but Egypt is speaking with its feet. I mean, they're voting with their feet in a certain sense. There are 100,000 people in Tahrir Square where the revolution began, which overthrew Mubarak. And right now, as we speak, and it's getting bigger and bigger. So I think he's going to have to Morsi's going to have to back down on this. It's way too big and way too much opposition domestically. The Obama administration is trying to, I hate to use the term, but lead from behind again. But what they're trying to do is not intervene in, or not seen as intervening in Egypt's affairs, especially, you have to understand, they just came off of this great negotiation that Egypt really sealed with the ceasefire between Gaza and Israel. And everyone needs Egypt to be a rational player in the Middle East because they're so key to everything, and especially peace treaties with Israel. So they're trying to see if he can resolve it domestically. But at some point, they're going to have to weigh in. You're right.
Well, Dr. Falk, what about the reaction to other countries in the UN? Is there any hand-wringing, any outrage? I mean, one of the comments that we were saying earlier, the same thing what was attempted by, say, Chancellor Merkel in Germany. I mean, everybody would be going absolutely bananas over it, and it's almost like the reaction has been duplicitous.
Well, there is some of that, and people are worried of what is a Muslim Brotherhood government going to do when it has all that power. Now, Morsi's argument is he only wants to make sure that he gets to decide the treaties, because there's a lot of he's got a really tough road, because he's got Islamists who want to break the treaties with Israel. He's got Democrats who want to keep things going, but there's not a lot of organization on the youth movement and all those people who sort of created this revolution and at least started it and got it going. So he's trying to balance all this. But the UN really tries to stay out of what they consider domestic affairs, and that's what this is. But the diplomats are sort of shocked by it and trying to figure out what's going on. But they've also got Syria blowing up, the Middle East blowing up, and North Korea.
I know, we got to get this out. We're going to have you back this week about North Korea. Dr. Pamela Falk, CBS News Chief UN Correspondent. We're out of time. Thank you for...
Absolutely.